The wind howled like a living thing as snow hurled itself against the cliffs above Lake Tahoe. Each gust slammed into the glass walls of the mansion perched there, a monument of steel, stone and silence that belonged to Adrian Cole, a billionaire who had long ago traded the noise of the world for the comfort of emptiness. Inside, the fire roared in the hearth, the only sound against the storm's fury. Adrian sat alone in the amber glow, a book open but unread in his hand, his reflection flickering in the wide windows like a ghost he no longer recognized. Then came the knock. 3 sharp strikes, hesitant then desperate, cut through the hum of the wind. He lifted his head, startled. The gate was half a mile away and buried under snow. No one should be here. For a moment he thought it was the storm itself, a branch torn loose, ice breaking off the roof. But then it came again, louder, pleading. He stood, the leather chair creaking behind him. The sound unsettled him, not because of danger, but because it was human. Adrian lived by routine, no visitors, no interruptions. The world had already taken what it wanted from him. Solitude was the price he chose to pay. Still, something about those knocks held urgency, a rhythm that seemed to carry a heartbeat. Pulling on a heavy wool sweater, he walked the marble hallway. The air grew colder with every step until he reached the door, a towering oak slab framed in wrought iron. The moment he touched the handle, another gust hit the house, rattling the panes. He hesitated. Whoever was out there had made it through a blizzard to reach him. His mind whispered, "You owe no one anything." But his pulse disagreed. He pulled the door open. The storm lunged in, flinging ice and wind across the polished floor. Adrian flinched and squinted through the swirl of white. At first there was only chaos, spinning flakes and the outline of the pine forest. But then, in the halo of the floodlight, a small shape emerged. A girl, no older than 7, stood on the step, her coat thin and soaked, her lips trembling blue. Her arms clutched a bundle so tightly he thought it was a bag. Then the bundle moved, a faint cry, fragile and sharp, and his stomach clenched. It was a baby. "Please," she said, her voice breaking through the roar of the wind. "Please, sir, just one warm night." The words seemed to echo in the vastness of the hall. Snow had already gathered in her hair, her eyelashes crusted with frost. The child's eyes, dark and fierce despite the fear, locked onto his. Adrian froze. Every instinct told him to close the door, to protect his isolation, to stay untouched by whatever story had brought her here. But then he saw her hands, small, raw, trembling from exhaustion, yet still holding the baby close so the wind couldn't reach him. Adrian's voice came out harsher than intended. "Where are your parents?" She shook her head, pressing the baby tighter. "They're gone. Please, he's cold. He doesn't wake up when I call him." The fire behind him crackled faintly, the only warmth in the night. Adrian looked over his shoulder at the soft orange light spilling across the floor. His home was massive, heated, alive with comfort, and utterly empty. The contrast struck him like a physical blow. The baby whimpered again, weaker this time. Adrian felt something inside him stir, an echo from a place he thought he'd sealed off long ago. He had built his fortune to control the unpredictable. But this was chaos he couldn't measure, couldn't price, couldn't turn away from. He stepped aside, his voice quieter now. "Come in." The girl blinked, unsure she'd heard right. The wind pushed at her back, urging her forward. She hesitated, then stepped into the foyer, her shoes leaving tiny puddles on the rug. The warmth hit her face, and she gasped softly, as if breathing fire for the first time. Adrian closed the door behind them, shutting out the storm. The mansion fell silent again, except for the faint crackle of the fire and the fragile breaths of the baby in her arms. For the first time in years, Adrian Cole wasn't alone. And as he looked at the little girl standing before him, snow melting down her cheeks like tears, a single thought cut through his resistance. The night he opened that door, everything he believed about solitude would begin to unravel. Outside, the wind screamed one last time, as though furious that the man inside had dared to say yes. The fire hissed in protest as the door shut, sealing the storm outside. Adrian stood still for a moment, his pulse racing from the sudden disruption to his quiet world. The girl's small frame shivered uncontrollably, her soaked coat clinging to her shoulders, while the bundle in her arms, now clearly a baby, stirred with a faint whimper. The sound, fragile and human, reached into the one part of him that still remembered what it meant to care. He cleared his throat, trying to sound composed. "Sit there," he said, motioning toward the long hallway where light spilled from the living room. "You can warm up by the fire." She hesitated, her bare fingers tightening around the baby. "Is it really okay?" "It's warmer inside than out there," he replied, more sharply than he intended. But when she flinched, guilt pricked him. "Yes, it's okay," he added softly. The girl obeyed, walking carefully over the marble floor, her boots squeaking with melted snow. Adrian followed at a distance, watching her every step. She moved like someone afraid the world could break beneath her, slow, cautious, carrying her entire existence in her arms. The living room greeted them with the crackle of burning wood and the faint scent of pine. Adrian set down a thick blanket on the couch and nodded toward it. "Lay him there." She crouched down carefully and placed the baby on the couch near the fire. The baby was tiny, wrapped in a threadbare blanket that was no match for the freezing air they'd escaped. His cheeks were flushed red from cold, his little breaths shallow. The girl leaned over him, rubbing his hands gently, whispering something under her breath, words Adrian couldn't make out but felt were half prayer, half promise. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Laya," she said without looking up. "And this is Noah," Adrian nodded slowly. "How old is he?" 6 months, she said. "He was born in the summer. It was warm then." Her lips quivered with the memory. "We used to live near the city, but when it got cold, they told us we couldn't stay." "They?" Adrian asked quietly. "The people from the shelter. They said babies make too much noise." Her words came simply, like facts she'd already learned not to fight. Adrian said nothing. The crackle of the fire filled the silence between them. He wasn't a man used to offering comfort. He knew how to fix broken companies, not broken children. And yet, standing there watching the girl clutch her brother, he felt a hollow inside him shift, something giving way. He went to the kitchen, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness, and returned minutes later with a tray. Bread, cheese, and a glass of milk, simple but warm. "Eat," he said, setting it down. "You'll make yourself sick if you don't." She stared at the food, hesitant, as if expecting a trick. Only when Noah let out a soft cry did she reach for a piece of bread. She tore it into tiny pieces, eating slowly, her eyes darting to Adrian now and then, unsure if she should thank him or fear him. "Why did you come here?" he asked. "I saw the light from far away," she murmured. "It looked like it was calling." Adrian looked toward the window. The snowstorm was relentless. The mountain road leading to his mansion was invisible now, erased by white. "You walked up that hill?" "In this?" she nodded. "I had to." He was crying. "I didn't know where else to go." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, Adrian heard the weight behind her calm, how exhaustion and fear had been held down only by willpower. The baby stirred again, coughing softly, and her eyes went wide. "He's hot," she whispered. "He's never this hot." Adrian moved closer, instinct overriding hesitation. He touched the baby's forehead. Heat pulsed beneath his palm. "He's burning up." Laya's grip tightened protectively. "If we go to a hospital, they'll take him from me. They always take babies away from big sisters. I can't let that happen." Her words hit him like a knife. He saw himself reflected in her eyes. Not the billionaire, but the boy he once was, waiting for someone to come back and never seeing them again. "Listen," he said quietly, lowering his voice. "We'll go together. I'll say he's with me. No one will separate you, I promise." She searched his face for truth, trembling not from the cold now but from hope she didn't dare trust. "Promise?" she whispered. "I promise." Outside, thunder rolled softly in the distance, the kind that meant the storm was growing worse. Adrian grabbed his coat and one of his thick scarves, wrapping it gently around Laya's shoulders. Then with movements that felt strangely natural, he lifted Noah from her arms and cradled him against his chest. The baby's tiny fingers brushed his collar, and Adrian felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest, a sense of duty that was no longer a choice. "Let's get him warm," he said. "We're going to the city." Laya nodded, clutching the edge of his sleeve as they walked toward the garage. The mansion lights flickered under the weight of the storm, and as the heavy door opened to reveal the white fury outside, Adrian glanced down at her. Her eyes, fierce and fragile at once, met his with wordless trust, and somewhere deep inside, he knew this night would not just change theirs, it would rewrite his life forever. Snow whirled through the dark sky like 1,000 tiny shards of glass. The storm had swallowed the mountain road, leaving only the faint outline of tire tracks before the wind erased them again. Adrian gripped the steering wheel tighter, the headlights of his SUV slicing narrow tunnels through the blizzard. The wipers squealed against ice, struggling to keep the glass clear. Every few seconds he glanced into the rearview mirror. Laya was in the back seat, holding Noah close, whispering soft words that were half lullaby, half prayer. The baby's breathing came fast and shallow. Even over the hum of the engine, Adrian could hear the faint wheeze in each inhale. Fear pressed on his chest, unfamiliar and raw. He had faced financial collapses, business betrayals, and the cruelty of power, but never this. Never the helplessness of watching a fragile life flicker in his care. "How much farther?" Laya's small voice trembled, barely audible above the wind. "Not far," he said, keeping his tone steady though his heart raced. "Just hold him tight. We'll be there soon." The car slid slightly on the frozen road, and Laya gasped. Adrian's jaw clenched as he fought the skid, easing the vehicle back into control. A wall of snow loomed ahead where the road curved, and beyond it, the faint glow of the city, their only salvation. Minutes later, they reached the outskirts of Reno. Streetlights glimmered like distant candles through the snow. The hospital appeared like a beacon, its red emergency sign cutting through the storm. Adrian pulled up to the entrance, jumped out, and ran around to open the rear door. Laya's eyes were wide, her knuckles white as she clutched Noah. "Come on," he said, reaching for the baby. She hesitated. "You said they won't take him?" "I won't let them," he answered firmly. "I promised, remember?" She studied his face for half a heartbeat, then slowly handed Noah into his arms. The baby was light, too light. Adrian felt the fever burning through the layers of blankets. He didn't wait another second. Pushing through the sliding doors, he shouted, "We need help!" "He's burning up!" The sterile air hit them immediately. Warm, dry, humming with fluorescent light and urgency. Nurses rushed forward, their eyes narrowing with practiced focus. One took Noah from Adrian's arms while another guided Laya to a seat. Adrian followed, his shoes squeaking against the linoleum, feeling completely out of place among the chaos of compassion. A doctor appeared, a tall man in his 50s with calm eyes and a kind but firm voice. "Tell me what happened," he said as they moved toward the exam room. Adrian spoke quickly. "They showed up at my house out in the mountains. The baby's been in the cold too long. Fever started tonight." The doctor nodded, already checking the baby's breathing. "He's struggling with pneumonia. We'll start oxygen and antibiotics right away." Laya's small hands twisted in her lap. "He's going to be okay, right?" The doctor softened. "He's a fighter. He'll recover, but he needs rest and warmth." Adrian exhaled, relief mixing with guilt. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding on to fear. As nurses wheeled Noah into a small room, Adrian turned to Laya. She was staring at the floor, her face pale, eyes glassy with exhaustion. Gently, he crouched in front of her. "He's safe now," he said softly. "You both are." She shook her head weakly. "They'll ask questions about us. They'll find out we don't have anyone. They'll take him away," he hesitated. "They might ask questions, yes. But I'll be here to answer them. I told you, I won't let them separate you." Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, she leaned forward and rested her forehead against her knees, her small shoulders trembling, not from cold, but from release. Adrian placed a careful hand on her back, unsure if it would help, but she didn't move away. Hours blurred into the quiet rhythm of hospital machines. Snow melted from Adrian's coat, forming small puddles on the floor. Every so often, he'd glance through the glass window of the treatment room, where Noah slept under a soft blanket, tubes running gently to his nose. Each breath he took steadied something inside Adrian, a strange, unspoken responsibility that no longer felt optional. When the doctor returned, he smiled faintly. "He'll pull through. You brought him just in time." Adrian nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Thank you, doctor." As the man walked away, a woman in a navy blazer approached, holding a clipboard. "Mr. Cole?" she asked politely. "I'm Mara. I handle welfare cases when minors come in without guardians." Adrian's guard rose instantly. "They're not a case," he said evenly. "They're under my care for now." Her eyes softened but remained assessing. "Of course. Still, we'll need some information. Names, any family, how they came to be with you." Laya tensed. Adrian noticed and stepped closer to her, placing a hand on the back of her chair. "They came to me in the storm," he said. "That's all you need to know tonight." Mara hesitated, then nodded, sensing his resolve. "All right. We'll talk tomorrow." When she left, silence returned, gentle but charged. Laya looked up at him with tired eyes, fear still flickering beneath her lashes. "You're not alone anymore," Adrian said quietly. "Do you understand?" She blinked once, then twice, as if trying to believe it. "People always say that," she whispered. "Then they leave." He met her gaze, unwavering. "I'm not leaving." Outside, the storm began to ease, the first faint light of dawn rising behind the clouds. For the first time in years, Adrian Cole felt something powerful and terrifying settle inside him, a promise not of profit, but of purpose. And though he couldn't see it yet, this night, the night he opened his door, was only the beginning of a journey that would change all three of their lives forever. Morning crept slowly into the hospital windows, painting the halls in pale silver. The storm outside had weakened to a whisper, but the air inside was still thick with the residue of fear and sleeplessness. Adrian sat in the waiting area, his elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the glass pane that separated him from the small room where baby Noah lay sleeping under a soft white blanket. Tubes trailed gently from his nose, each rise and fall of his chest proof that the worst had passed. Laya sat curled up on one of the chairs, her head resting against her brother's blanket, exhaustion etched into her small face. She had refused to leave his side even for a moment. When nurses tried to move her, she clung tighter. Adrian had quietly intervened, asking them to let her stay. For some reason, they listened. Maybe it was the tone of his voice, gentle but certain, like a man used to getting his way only when it mattered. The doctor had said Noah would recover. That single sentence had softened something inside Adrian he hadn't realized was still brittle. He found himself watching the siblings through the glass, trying to make sense of what he was feeling. Relief? Maybe, but it was more than that. A strange ache of protectiveness had taken root, and the longer he stayed, the deeper it grew. When Noah stirred and let out a soft coo, Laya's face lit up. She whispered his name like a prayer, brushing his hair away from his forehead. It was a small gesture, tender, practiced, but it gripped Adrian harder than any business victory ever had. He left briefly to get coffee from the hospital cafeteria. The bitter scent clung to his hands as he walked back, but his thoughts were far from the cup. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so invested in someone else's well-being. Years of solitude had convinced him that distance meant safety. Now, a child's quiet breathing was undoing all of that. When he returned, he found Laya awake and watching him. Her eyes were wary at first, but then softened when he handed her a small paper bag. "Breakfast," he said. "It's not much, but it's warm." She peeked inside, a muffin and a small carton of milk. "Thank you," she whispered. He sat across from her, studying her closely. "You take care of him well," he said, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I have to. There's no one else. Not even friends? Relatives?" She shook her head. People stop caring when you don't have anything to give back. The words hit him harder than he expected. He had built empires around that very principle: transactions, value, returns. But hearing it from a 7-year-old made it sound cruel. Sometimes, he said quietly, people just need a reason to look again. Before she could respond, a familiar voice broke through the calm. Mr. Cole? It was Mara, the social worker from the night before. She smiled politely, clipboard in hand, but her tone was firm. I just need a few minutes of your time. Adrian stood, nodding toward Laya. I'll be right back. In the hallway, Mara's professional expression softened slightly. The hospital contacted the authorities as required. We'll need to file temporary placement papers for the children. Until we can identify family, they'll likely need foster accommodation. No, Adrian said immediately. Mara blinked. I understand your concern, but protocol? I'm not concerned. I'm responsible. They stay with me. His voice was calm, but beneath it was steel. She studied him. You realize what that entails? Legal guardianship, background checks, state visits. This isn't something wealth alone can buy. I'm not offering money, he replied. I'm offering a home. Mara's expression softened again, but her eyes remained cautious. I'll note that. For now, they can remain under your supervision until we process the forms. When he returned to the room, Laya was holding Noah's tiny hand, tracing circles on his palm. She looked up as he entered. They're not taking us, right? He crouched beside her chair, meeting her gaze. Not if I can help it. Her eyes shimmered with something fragile, hope mixed with disbelief. You really mean that? Yes, he said simply. You're safe here. Later that afternoon, when Noah was cleared to leave, Adrian carried him through the sliding doors. The air outside was crisp, the storm reduced to a hush. Snow still blanketed the mountains, but sunlight was breaking through, scattering across the frozen lake like fragments of gold. Laya walked beside him, her small hand gripping his coat sleeve. As the SUV rolled back up the mountain road, the mansion appeared in the distance, its dark glass reflecting the dawn light. It no longer looked cold or imposing. It looked waiting. Inside, the fire had burned low, but the air still held warmth. Laya stepped in first, her eyes scanning the vast space with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. It's so quiet, she murmured. It used to be, Adrian said. He placed Noah in a soft blanket near the hearth and watched the baby's chest rise and fall, slow and steady now. The quiet that had once comforted him felt different tonight, not empty, but alive. Laya turned toward him, her small voice breaking the silence. Do you think we could stay until he's really better? Adrian met her eyes. As long as you need. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried more trust than words ever could. In that moment, Adrian realized something had shifted permanently inside him. The mansion that had stood as a monument to his isolation had become something else entirely, a place where life had dared to return. And though he didn't say it aloud, he knew this was no longer temporary. The storm had brought them to his door for a reason, and deep down, he was starting to believe that reason was him. The following morning dawned pale and quiet, with the last of the snow melting from the balcony railings of Adrian's mansion. For the first time in years, sunlight filtered into the rooms not as decoration, but as warmth. It slid across the marble floors, across the table where a bowl of fruit sat half-eaten, and came to rest on the couch where Laya slept with Noah curled against her chest. Adrian stood in the doorway, still wearing the same sweater from the night before. The sight of them, two small figures huddled together in a space built for grandeur, did something strange to him. He had designed this house to keep the world away, but now the world was sleeping peacefully beneath his roof. Noah stirred, letting out a soft cry. Laya woke instantly, rubbing her eyes before leaning over to soothe him. She whispered something gentle, her voice a melody too soft for words. Adrian watched the moment quietly, a lump forming in his throat. How long had it been since anyone had filled these walls with such tenderness? He stepped forward. You can rest, you know. I can hold him for a bit. Laya blinked, uncertain. You know how? Adrian almost smiled. No, but I can learn. She hesitated, then slowly passed Noah into his arms. The baby's warmth seeped into his chest, the fragile heartbeat steady against his palm. It was terrifying and miraculous all at once. Adrian had spent years mastering the language of markets, technology, and innovation. But this tiny weight in his arms felt like something far greater. Something he couldn't control, only protect. As he paced slowly near the fire, Laya yawned and watched him with sleepy eyes. You look like a dad, she murmured. The words struck him harder than he expected. He glanced at her, unsure how to respond. I don't think I'd make a very good one, he said at last. Laya tilted her head. Why? Because I don't know how to stay, he whispered, almost to himself. She didn't seem to understand, but she smiled anyway. You stayed last night. Adrian turned away, swallowing the sudden sting in his eyes. Children had a way of speaking the truth without even knowing it. Later that day, the sound of tires crunching over snow echoed up the driveway. Adrian looked through the window and saw a government SUV stop at the gate. His chest tightened. 2 figures stepped out, Mara, the social worker, and a man in a dark overcoat carrying a briefcase. He met them at the door. You're early, Adrian said coolly. Mara offered a practiced smile. I thought we'd get the paperwork started. This is Mr. Jennings from the state office. We'll just need a few questions answered. Inside the living room, Laya sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, clutching Noah. Her eyes darted between the adults as though expecting to be told to leave. Jennings flipped open a file. We understand the children arrived without guardianship. Until we confirm family, we must arrange a temporary care order. They have care, Adrian said sharply. They have me. Jennings looked unimpressed. Mr. Cole, good intentions are not legal custody. You're not a relative. You live alone without prior experience caring for minors. The state has processes for a reason. The words tasted bitter. Adrian had spent his entire adult life bending rules and systems in his favor. But now, faced with bureaucracy built to protect, he felt powerless. His wealth meant nothing in the language of family. Laya's small voice broke through the tension. Please don't take us. We'll be good. I promise. Jennings sighed, uncomfortable. Sweetheart, it's not about that. But Adrian stepped forward, his tone quiet but absolute. If the law requires proof of stability, you'll have it. If it demands oversight, I'll comply. But those children are not being moved from this house tonight. Something in his voice silenced the room. Mara exchanged a glance with Jennings, who finally nodded. Very well, he said reluctantly. We'll issue temporary permission under your supervision, pending evaluation. When they left, the silence returned. Heavy, but alive. Laya's eyes were wet, though she was trying to hide it. They're coming back, aren't they? She asked. Probably, Adrian admitted. But next time we'll be ready. She frowned. Ready how? He knelt beside her. By showing them this isn't just a house anymore. It's a home. Her lips quivered into a small smile, uncertain but brave. Then I'll help make it look like one, she said. And she did. That afternoon, she cleaned the dusty corners of the kitchen, hung her small drawings on the refrigerator, and arranged Noah's blanket near the fireplace. By evening, the mansion no longer felt like an empty monument to success. It felt lived in. It felt alive. When night came, Adrian found Laya asleep again on the couch, Noah nestled in her arms. The firelight flickered across their faces, warm and steady. For the first time in years, Adrian didn't feel haunted by silence. He sat quietly beside them, letting the weight of the day settle into something tender. Outside, the snow had stopped completely. The stars returned, scattered like tiny lanterns across the black sky. Adrian looked at them through the glass, the reflection of the 2 children glowing faintly behind him, and realized that for the first time since he'd built his empire, he didn't want to be alone at the top. He didn't yet know what love would demand of him, but he knew he was willing to find out. Snow melted in silver ribbons down the stone walls of the mansion. Days had passed since the visit from the social workers, yet the weight of that encounter lingered like a shadow. Adrian could feel it in the air, an unease, quiet but sharp, that made the house feel too still. He had spent the last few days buried in research, calls and paperwork, determined to learn everything about guardianship and adoption law. The irony wasn't lost on him. A man who had once fought to keep the world out was now fighting tooth and nail to keep two strangers in. Laya noticed his tension even if she didn't understand its cause. She followed him around with the same mix of curiosity and caution she'd shown since the storm. Whenever he disappeared into his office, she'd sit in the hallway outside, sketching in her little notebook, flowers, houses, stars. Sometimes she'd draw him too, though she hid the pages when he walked by. That afternoon, sunlight spilled through the windows as Adrian sat at the dining table, flipping through documents. The fire had died low, but the house no longer felt cold. Noah gurgled happily on a blanket nearby, and Laya sat cross-legged beside him, humming softly. "You should be outside," Adrian said, without looking up. "The snow's melting. You might like the garden," she hesitated. "Is it okay if we go?" He glanced at her, realizing she still asked permission for things as small as stepping outside. "Of course it's okay." Minutes later, he watched from the window as she walked through the garden. Noah sat bundled in a stroller she'd found in the garage, his laughter echoing faintly across the snow-dotted grass. Laya pointed toward the trees, her small voice carrying on the breeze. For a fleeting second, the sight made Adrian forget the world beyond his property line. But the illusion didn't last. His phone buzzed, a call from his attorney. "Adrian," the man said, his tone heavy. "The state's moving fast. They'll be back soon to inspect your suitability. They'll want background checks, child-proofing, even psychological evaluations. You're up against a system that doesn't bend easily." Adrian rubbed his temple. "Then we'll make it bend." "Money can't fix this one entirely," the lawyer warned. "They'll want to know your intentions." "My intentions?" Adrian looked out the window again. Laya was crouched in the snow, helping Noah pick a handful of wet leaves as if they were treasure. His throat tightened. "Tell them I intend to keep them safe." That night, as he worked late, he didn't hear the quiet footsteps in the hallway. Laya stood by the door, her face half in shadow. "You're sending us away, aren't you?" Adrian froze. "What?" "I heard you on the phone," she said, her voice trembling. "You said they're coming back. You said they don't think you're good enough. That means they'll take us." He pushed the papers aside and stood quickly. "Laya? You promised," she said, clutching the strap of her old backpack. "You promised you wouldn't let them separate us." "I meant it," he said. "But there are rules I have to follow." She shook her head, eyes filling with tears. "That's what everyone says before they leave." The words pierced him. Before he could answer, she turned and ran. By the time he reached the front door, the snow had started again, light and steady. Her footprints led down the driveway, small and hurried, vanishing into the white. Panic flooded him. He grabbed his coat and sprinted out, the cold slicing into his lungs. "Laya!" he shouted into the wind. "Laya, stop." Through the blur of falling snow, he saw her small figure near the gate, clutching Noah's blanket close to her chest. She turned when she heard him, eyes wide, cheeks streaked with tears. "I can't let them take him," she cried. "They'll put us in different places. I can't lose him, not after Mama." Adrian slowed as he approached, lowering his voice. "You're not losing anyone. Not him, not me. I was on that call to protect you, not to let you go." She looked unsure, trembling against the cold. He knelt in the snow before her, breathing hard, his words breaking through the wind. "I know what it's like to wait for someone who never comes back. I know how it feels to think you have to survive alone. But you don't have to anymore. I'm here, and I'm staying." Laya stared at him for a long moment, her lips trembling. Then she stepped forward and buried her face against his chest, sobbing quietly. Adrian wrapped his arms around her and Noah's blanket, holding them both as if the storm itself could not pry them apart. Above them, snowflakes settled gently on his shoulders, melting into warmth that had nothing to do with the weather. When he finally carried her back toward the house, the front lights glowed through the storm like a promise. He looked down at her sleeping face, her small hand clutching his sweater, and realized this was no longer about obligation or pity. It was love, quiet, fierce and terrifying, the kind that demanded not wealth, but courage, the kind that would make him stand before the world and say what he had never dared to say before. They were his family now. The morning after the storm felt unreal, too still, too golden. The sun rose over the Sierra Nevada peaks, touching the glass walls of the mansion until the whole house shimmered like it had been reborn. Adrian stood in the kitchen, staring absently at the coffee machine while the events of the night replayed in his mind. The snow, Laya's tears, the desperation in her small voice when she said, "You promised." He hadn't slept. While Laya and Noah dozed safely upstairs, he sat in the study drafting a letter, his decision, once and for all. No more half measures, no more waiting for the world to decide if he was worthy of keeping them. He would fight. He would make it official. When Laya came down, she was still wearing the oversized sweater he had given her, its sleeves falling past her hands. Her hair was messy, her eyes tired, but she smiled faintly when she saw him. "You didn't sleep either," she said softly. "Not much," he admitted. "But I did something else." He handed her a folded document. She looked at it uncertainly, tracing the embossed letterhead. "What is it?" "It's the start of the process," he said. "To make you and Noah my family. Legally, permanently." Laya blinked. "You mean adoption?" Adrian nodded. "It'll take time, and there will be questions, but I'm not letting anyone take you away again." Her lips parted, trembling, and for a moment she didn't speak. Then she whispered, "But why?" He smiled gently. "Because you saved me too." Before she could reply, a knock echoed through the hall. Adrian's heart sank. He already knew who it was. The sound was polite, measured, the rhythm of authority, not pleading. When he opened the door, Mara stood there, flanked by 2 officials and a man holding a press badge. "Mr. Cole," Mara greeted with her usual composure, "we need to discuss the children's situation. The department has received multiple media inquiries since news of the storm rescue broke." "Media inquiries?" Adrian repeated, frowning. "Yes," said the reporter, stepping forward. "People want to know if it's true. The billionaire who took in 2 orphaned kids during the blizzard. There's a lot of speculation." Laya, who had crept to the staircase, froze when she heard the word orphaned. Her eyes filled instantly with dread. Adrian noticed and raised a hand to stop the reporter. "Enough," he said quietly. "You're not using their story for headlines." "Then tell it yourself," the man pressed. "The world already knows. Why not give them the truth?" Mara interjected gently. "He's not wrong, Mr. Cole. Publicity could complicate the legal process, or it could help. Right now, everyone is watching. The question is, what do you want them to see?" Adrian's gaze shifted to Laya, still standing halfway up the stairs, her arms wrapped around the railing like it was the only thing holding her steady. He saw fear in her eyes, the same fear that had haunted her since the night she'd knocked on his door. And suddenly, he knew exactly what he wanted them to see. He turned back to the group. "Call them all here," he said. "Every outlet, every camera, tonight." "Tonight?" Mara blinked. "You're sure?" "I am," he said firmly. "If the world wants a story, I'll give them one worth hearing." That evening, the mansion was awash with lights. News vans lined the driveway, their antennas piercing the dusk. Inside, camera crews set up in the grand foyer. Adrian stood near the fireplace, wearing a simple gray sweater instead of a suit. No stage, no prepared speech, just truth. When the cameras turned on, the reporter began. "Mr. Cole, the world has heard whispers about your act of kindness during the blizzard. Can you confirm who are these children to you?" Adrian looked directly into the lens. His voice was steady, but there was warmth beneath it, something that drew the entire room still. "They're not guests," he said. "They're my family." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Flashbulbs popped like sparks. Adrian continued, each word deliberate. "Laya and Noah came to my door in the middle of a storm. I could have turned them away. But I didn't. And in that moment, my life changed. They reminded me that compassion isn't charity. It's courage. It's choosing to care when it would be easier not to." He paused, letting the words sink in. Behind him, Laya stood with Noah in her arms, her small frame illuminated by the firelight. "I'm filing for legal guardianship," Adrian said, "and I'm establishing a trust in their names to support children who have nowhere to go. I built walls for wealth and silence, but these children taught me that real strength is in keeping the door open." The room fell quiet. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate before capturing the moment. Then the reporter asked, almost in awe, "So you're saying you're adopting them?" Adrian smiled faintly. "I'm saying they already belong here. Paperwork just makes it official." Behind him, Laya's lower lip trembled. She had never heard anyone speak about her that way. Not as a burden, not as a case, but as family. She took a hesitant step forward, clutching Noah closer, then reached out with her free hand until her fingers brushed Adrian's sleeve. He looked down at her, then back at the cameras. "You asked for the truth," he said. "This is it." Mara stood in the corner, her eyes misting despite herself. She had seen countless cases end in heartbreak, but rarely one born from such conviction. She scribbled in her notes, "Recommendation, placement favorable, stable home, genuine bond." When the conference ended, the crew packed up silently. The story was already making its way to the world, a billionaire's act of love that no one had expected. As the last car pulled away, Laya looked up at Adrian. "You told everyone we're your family," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because it's true," he answered. "And now everyone knows it." Her eyes glistened. "Then, we don't have to hide anymore?" He shook his head and smiled softly. "Never again." Laya leaned into him, resting her head against his chest as Noah giggled between them. Adrian closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of warmth, firewood, and new beginnings. Outside, the cameras might have captured the moment for the world, but the real story was unfolding quietly in the room behind them. A girl who finally felt safe, a man who had rediscovered his heart, and a baby who had brought them both together under a storm that had once meant to break them. And as the fire crackled, Adrian realized that love, once spoken aloud, had the power to silence every other noise in the world. Spring came to the mountains like a quiet miracle. The last of the snow melted into silver streams that trickled through pine roots and down toward Lake Tahoe's mirror-bright surface. The mansion, once a fortress of silence, now breathed with laughter and the soft rhythm of daily life. In the mornings, the air carried the smell of pancakes and sun-warmed wood. Laya had taken to humming while she set the table, her soft, off-key tunes filling the vast rooms that once echoed only with emptiness. Noah, plump now and full of energy, toddled between the kitchen counters, clutching a wooden spoon as if it were a sword. Adrian followed behind him with exaggerated seriousness, pretending to lose a battle every time the baby giggled and waved the spoon in victory. It had been weeks since the press conference, and though headlines had come and gone, something more lasting had taken root. Strangers sent letters, some grateful, some inspired, each one reinforcing the decision Adrian had made. But behind the newfound fame came one final challenge. A letter from the Department of Child Services marked urgent review of adoption proceedings. It would determine whether Laya and Noah would officially stay with him or be taken into state custody. Adrian read it twice, his heartbeat thudding. He was ready for questions, but not for the possibility of losing them. That night, after Laya and Noah had gone to bed, he stood by the window staring at the stars. The reflection of the living room behind him showed a home that finally looked alive. Toys on the floor, crayon drawings on the fridge, 2 small coats hanging beside his own. He whispered to himself, "They're mine now. They have to be." The next morning brought a visitor, Mara again, but this time without a clipboard or a neutral expression. She held a large envelope in her hands, her eyes soft. "Mr. Cole," she said. "May I come in?" Laya appeared in the hallway, cautious as ever. She had learned that unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. Adrian gestured her closer, kneeling to meet her eyes. "It's okay," he said quietly. "She's not here to take you away." Mara stepped forward, placing the envelope on the table. "I found something," she said. "Something that changes everything." Inside was a small locket, worn, silver, delicate. Adrian froze. He recognized it instantly. It was the one Laya never removed, the one she had clutched during the storm. But inside it, beneath the faded photograph of a young woman, was a folded piece of paper sealed with age. Laya's hands trembled as she opened it. The handwriting was shaky, but unmistakably filled with love. "If anything happens to me, please ensure my children are not alone. There is a man who owes me nothing but kindness. His name is Adrian Cole." Adrian's breath caught. He sat down heavily, staring at the words. Mara continued softly. "Your name was listed as the emergency contact. Their mother once worked for a foundation you sponsored 10 years ago. She saved your life after a car accident in San Francisco, pulled you from the wreck before help arrived. She never told anyone. She said she didn't need anything except to know she'd done the right thing." The memory hit him like a thunderclap. A rain-soaked street, twisted metal, and a woman's calm voice saying, "Hold on, you're going to be fine." He had forgotten her face, but now it was there in Laya's eyes. "She made you promise without knowing it," Mara said gently. "And now you've kept it." Laya's lips quivered. "My mama saved you?" Adrian nodded slowly, tears gathering at the edges of his vision. "Yes, and now I understand why the storm brought you to me." Mara smiled, slipping another document across the table. "The court reviewed your case this morning. Given this evidence and your declaration of guardianship, the adoption is approved." "Congratulations, Mr. Cole, it's official." The words hung in the air like sunlight. Laya stared at the paper, then at Adrian, as if trying to see if it was real. He nodded, his voice breaking. "We're a family, Laya. Forever." She launched herself into his arms, sobbing with joy. Noah squealed from his high chair, clapping his hands like he understood. Adrian laughed through his tears, holding them both close as if anchoring them to his heart. Later that day, they went to the park near the lake. The air smelled of pine and new earth. Laya ran barefoot through the grass, chasing after bubbles that shimmered in the sun. Adrian sat on the blanket, watching her with the kind of smile that only comes from peace hard-earned. Noah crawled into his lap, babbling nonsense that sounded like music. Laya returned, breathless, a folded piece of paper in her hand. "I made something," she said shyly. Adrian opened it carefully. Crayon figures smiled up at him, 3 people holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Above them she had written in crooked letters, "Our forever family." He stared at the drawing until his vision blurred, then pulled her into a hug. "Thank you for finding me," he whispered. "You gave me back everything I didn't know I'd lost." She looked up, smiling through her tears. "You didn't just find us," she said. "Mama sent us to you," Adrian nodded. "And I'll spend the rest of my life proving she made the right choice." As the sun dipped behind the mountains, the lake shimmered like molten gold. Laya and Noah fell asleep in his arms, their tiny breaths sinking with the breeze. Adrian watched the horizon fade into dusk and thought of the night that had changed everything. The knock on the door, the snow, the choice that had begun it all. Storms, he realized, didn't just destroy, they delivered. They tore away what no longer mattered and left behind the people who did. And in that truth, as the sky turned violet and the stars awoke, Adrian Cole finally understood what it meant to be rich, not in fortune, but in family, and in the quiet courage to open one's door when the world comes knocking.